Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Unashamed. My name is Daniel Clayton. I'm coming to you from Oklahoma, of all places. My good friend, my co-host, Mr. Chris Knight, is not here with us tonight. He had some personal family matters to attend to, so please just, if you're listening, please keep him in your prayers, him and his family. But joining me, I have a very good friend of mine. Don't know whether to call him a friend or my punching bag who punches back, Mr. Cole Davis. So Cole, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do, what you're about, where you are.
Hey, that no stranger to Hebrew Nation nowadays. Good evening, Daniel. And yes, I would say that's a fairly apt description of me. And yeah, I'm down here and I'm actually above you in Leavenworth, Kansas. For those of you who have not listened to The Lion's Path on Wednesday nights, I'm the host of that show, and that's the show where we talk about demonic forces and deliverance and all issues relating to that.
Yes, and if you do not listen to that show, please go do so. That is one that I make sure to listen to every week. It is, some of the best stuff out there. A little shameless plug there.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell everybody that's listening, this show kind of tends to gear more toward youth, but I actually have no idea who listens, so, I just kind of throw whatever I assume out there. But the things we're going to be talking about tonight, these are, probably, I'm sure you would agree, not the most popular things to talk about. But they are, in my mind, very relevant, very important, and not talking about them does not make them go away.
Oh, for sure. My mom actually sent me a note one day, and she was praying in the spirit, and the Father kind of told her that subjects like the ones we talk about on the Lion's Path are actually described as poisonous. Some of these subjects can become poisonous if they're not handled correctly. And that's part of our walk, though, is to be able to drink poison and not be harmed by it. And we have to engage these things. And we can do so from a place of authority and a place of fearlessness, and then to overcome many of the subjects we're going to talk about tonight.
Oh yeah, and we see that in Paul even, he, was bit by something poison. I can't remember exactly the thing, but he was absolutely fine. And,
Yep.
So we're going to be covering some of these things that might lead us into those dark places. And, like you said, it's an important thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why the enemy attacks it so much and makes it seem like such a poison, is because if we get a hold of it, that's one more weapon we have in our arsenal against him. So Cole, I've heard you talk about a thing, an acronym called RBR, and the first one of those is rejection. And youth, young people, really anyone, we have so many opportunities in our life for rejection. Be it a job that we're trying to get, a relationship, or really anything. So can you go into that process and what you've studied on that?
Sure thing. Rejection is actually if you want to describe human evil as a tree, rejection is the seed that gets planted. And that rejection that happens as a result of when somebody who is supposed to be something to you, something special to you. The biggest one I've seen, I don't see it in anything. At least I haven't yet. I haven't seen in anything but the most intimate relationships a person can have, being parent, child, or husband, wife, husband. That rejection runs very deep, and it's kind of the first initial wound that happens when somebody rejects you. It's really a shock to your system because it makes you question inherently everything about yourself. Are you worth the time? Are you worthy to be loved? Are you, and it makes you question your own self-worth and your own view of yourself. So it's really the first strike against the love that you're supposed to have, a healthy love that you're supposed to have for yourself.
Yeah, that's very, I don't remember you saying that. So, the scripture says to love, one another as we love ourselves, but that is becoming increasingly hard as we see many, 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 many people who have such a hard time loving themselves, either on one end of the spectrum or the other. They don't love themselves enough, or they love themselves way too much. So,
Right.
where can you even find the balance in that?
The Leviticus 19:18 is the verse that says that, and actually, technically, there's three, but that love your neighbor as yourself. There's actually two commandments in that, because if you don't love yourself, you have no basis or base to love anybody else from. It becomes a hollow act because that's what you're supposed to do, not that you genuinely do it. So it's a very, very dangerous thing to happen to someone. It needs to be handled very quickly.
Yeah, so, the rejection that comes, the questioning that comes with it, that wound that happens, what do we do with that? What are the dangers of not not confronting that? It's a popular thing to run away from your problems, to Facebook them instead of face them. So,
Right.
How do we address those things?
The biggest way to address it is to, and it sounds, it's not the mystical Tony Robbins, and I have nothing against Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins' answer that the motivation thing. To be honest with you, one of the best ways to do that is to turn to the scriptures and read what the Father thinks of you, because that is something where those words, that living word, needs to come in like a salve and heal that wound, and to change and remind you that you are loved, remind you that you are never going to be rejected by the Father, But we tend to internalize that. We tend to go, the other, one thing, the way that we don't accept that from somebody is when somebody rejects you, you have to remove the idea of their innocence in doing that. Okay. And the reason I say that is, if they are innocent in what they're doing, then they are actually telling the truth. When most people who do something, they reject you, they say something nasty to you as a child, they're doing it to hurt you. They're doing it because they're acting out their own anger or their own fears. And so you have to look at those words and go, I don't have to own those because that person used them as a weapon. So that is a very powerful way to make those emotions and those memories null and void.
Yeah, and even that in itself goes against, maybe our mindset of, just blatantly forgiving others. Forgiving others is not just some magical, wonderful little thing. Sometimes it's just letting them off the hook enough to be able to heal yourself.
When I was in Oregon, somebody asked me, they said, does forgiving mean forgetting? And I say, forgiving means forgetting one thing and one thing only, and that is the pain caused by that person. You don't forget the lesson. You don't forget the wisdom you gained from that experience. And you don't forget that can then benefit somebody else, but you forget the hurt and pain. That's the only way you can move on and truly forgive somebody.
Absolutely. So, the moral there is, when rejection comes, deal with it right then and there. Don't let it go on, because if you let it go on, that leads us to the next letter in the acronym. Not the nicest word. Oh, go ahead.
Before we go there, there's one thing I wanted to say, is that what I've noticed is that if you're speaking to youth, Daniel, the ages that they are getting rejected and the foundation that's being laid there is happening in their lives now, to teenagers and young adults.
Right.
They're now dealing with those emotions for the first time. They're now understanding what those things mean. They're now having to process certain things. If you're a teenager or younger, even 20 to 25, this is the age where rejection is taking hold. So you have to be very careful. The Father says that He is our hiding place. And when I hear people get rejected, they say, I just want to run and hide. Well, go and run and hide in Him where you're supposed to, So if you want to proceed to the next one, we can get there. So.
Yeah. Like you said, how we deal with things now, it sets the pattern. Probably one of the biggest things of restoration is, that's what restoration is. It's fixing the problems that were done not yesterday or the day before usually, but way, 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 way long ago. That's what we're restoring now in in the big picture. So
You're patching the foundation.
yeah, so good word there. So we get to bitterness.
Yes. Bitterness is where bitterness is the root, and bitterness is usually rarely seen. It's a very internal emotion. It is a very and it's one of the most destructive emotions, because bitterness in and of itself is a focus on what happened to you. It's now you are taking your attention and focusing on the wound that happened when you were rejected. So it is very much a self-centered desire to be miserable.
Ouch.
And yeah, it is and I'm telling you, this is what it is. Bitterness is one of those, it has no place in the life of a believer. Bitterness in and of itself is an inability to accept pain that somebody caused you. Well, when you don't accept it, your focus is always on it. It's like you're always trying to keep that pain at bay, but in fact, you're giving it power in your heart. And it's something the enemy wants in you very badly, because it takes all the focus from the Father, who will help you process all those things, and puts it right on the... It's almost like you have a broken arm and you just keep staring at the broken arm rather than walking to the doctor who can heal it,
Right.
And then a lot of times people will re-break their arm and keep it broken because they begin to enjoy being a victim.
Or being the center of attention.
Very much so. And pretty soon it becomes a self-centeredness. And it is the emotional aspect of as a spiritual darkness. It is it begins to dominate everything that you do. In fact, it is actually one of the most powerful idols that people raise up in their hearts. And there is no point in pointing out Christmas trees to other people if you are carrying around the idol of bitterness in your heart, because you are in much more danger, in my humble opinion. You are in much more danger than the person who is doing that, because you know better, Hebrew roots folks.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, you're destroying yourself, which is then destroying your relationships with other people, which is destroying your ability to make disciples of those people. So, it's this big old long nasty chain of things that we have no business with. Now, there is a difference between bitterness and anger, right? Anger has a place of being, with discernment. There is a place.
It's really a difference between bitterness and sorrow, because inherently bitterness is a sadness. Sorrow leads to godly repentance. Sorrow is, according to Ecclesiastes 7, sorrow has a purpose. Bitterness has no purpose other than keeping the person where they are, focused on their pain. And it's a self-centeredness and an unwillingness to move on from the hurt and learn from it.
Yeah.
And when you are bitter in your heart, there's a term I came up with, which is you smell like demon bait when you're bitter. We put off a fragrance, according to Paul in Corinthians. We put off a fragrance that smells like life. It's that altar of frankincense. Well, if you're putting off a bitter smell, then it attracts somebody else. It's blood in the water. You're now attracting sharks because you have an open wound, with blood seeping from it. So it's only a matter of time before there's a demonic influence in this.
Yeah. And I mean, for anyone that sounds strange to, I mean, if you look at for one example, the tabernacle, the offerings were a fragrant aroma for Yahweh. So if there can be something that we can do that's a fragrant, nice, pleasing aroma for Him, there's absolutely the opposite of being a like you said, a life for the opposite side of things.
Yes, and you've been around bitter people before, I'm sure, and you just kind of get this bad vibe from them, and you just kind of go, "Ooh, that doesn't smell good," And you
Yeah.
can start to smell it on people as soon as you begin developing your discernment, your spirit of discernment. You can smell it on them.
Yes, and one of the main things I see from people I see as bitter is a sense of entitlement.
Yes.
And that's, we're not entitled to anything. We were given by God everything that we have. We are entitled to none of it. So, that just further goes
Well,
along with.
yeah, in our nation today, we're a nation of therapists, and people care more about why somebody's doing what they're doing than getting them to stop. It's
Mm,
so what happens with the sense of entitlement is it's a desire to mask that pain. It's a burning desire to deal with that through material goods or through manipulation or through bitter emotions. It's awful.
yes, and the sad thing is, of course, if you continue on that path of bitterness, it doesn't stop there, and God forbid if that continues, what's the next place it takes us to?
Well, it takes us to the third letter in our acronym, which is R, which is rebellion. And rebellion has two forms. There's an active rebellion and then there's passive rebellion. And both are just as bad as the other. Now, active rebellion is you're actually bearing fruit. The Bible talks about somebody's bearing good fruit or they will bear bad fruit. Well, bad fruit is born through rebellion. You are actually producing something, meaning you're giving something into your environment that is poisonous. You are now actively working against the holy thing in your area. And that's a very dangerous place to be. Bitterness and rebellion actually in Hebrew have the same root word. It's almost, in fact, Naomi, when she comes back with Ruth to the land of Israel, she says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, which is the word for bitterness."
Mm.
And rebellion, which I believe is Mari, is actually from bitterness. So it's one progression to the other. So now the active rebellion is you're bearing the malice, the greed, the lust, the seeking to take down people around you. You are just introducing negativity and evil into your area. And the other form of rebellion is passive rebellion. Now this is bearing no fruit, which in the word is just as bad as bearing bad fruit. Because a tree that bears no fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire,
Yeah.
just the same as a tree that it bears bad fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So, bearing the no fruit is the passive, the person who goes and buries their talent in the dirt when they're afraid that the king is too severe. It is the one who does nothing for the kingdom. He eats food but doesn't work. All those type of things, but it's just as bad. Now, the passive rebellers usually have been taught to be passive. They've been taught that anything they do is bad. Literally, they can't do it. You hear people say before, I can't do anything right. So they just don't do anything.
Hmm.
Well, that's, one, that's a lie from the enemy. B, you can do something right. You're choosing not to, So, active and passive rebellion are both just as bad.
Yeah, and rebellion, I kind of see it as one of the many terms that has been so watered down in our society, and we picture rebellion as a teenager slipping out of their parents' house at night, which sadly these days is also a pretty common thing. And there's such a lack of discipline that we don't even in our minds, even if it's not intentional, sometimes it's easy to just glance over that and not understand and realize how much of an effect that really has on everything, physical and spiritual.
The rebellious, it's one of the most controversial verse or sections of scripture in the Torah, which is the rebellious son. And the rebellious son, I have met a few rebellious sons, and a couple of, they get in fights, they get drunk, they do all these other things. It's really that they are completely working against the holiness of Israel. They are immature, and they are completely self-centered. So at its core, rebellion is now a self-centeredness where you are now affecting other people and you are now bearing fruit. And like you said, it's kind of one of those things where I think a lot of teenagers are not necessarily rebellious, but maybe a little bit defiant.
Yeah.
Which defiant, I think, would be more apt. A rebellion is they're actually working against their parents. Most of them just don't want to hear it, which I would consider more like a defiance.
Right.
And I think we all have times of that. I think like you said, I think you're perfectly right with rebellion has been watered down to something that it's not anymore. Biblical rebellion is always met with judgment. Always.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. We have to find a balance in it because, we all do have some kind of defiant nature. If we didn't, we wouldn't be going against everything the world is telling us and keeping Torah and following Yeshua. If we had no sense of a righteous side of that, we'd be Mr. Milquetoast, just following the stream.
It's literally defiance is acting out critical thinking, whether for right or for wrong. The Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, it's you don't get a much more defiant trio than that, So, but they critically thought, and they went, "No, we're not going to do this because of the implications of this,"
Yeah.
So defiance is not always a bad thing, but it's who you are being defiant against. That's the issue.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, we have the rejection, bitterness, and rebellion. Each of them can be, with a willing person, a willing attitude, willing heart, they can be stopped in their tracks. You're not doomed to anything. And so go ahead.
I'm sorry. The cure for all of these, quote unquote, is repentance in every single one. Except for rejection, I think that initial hit is not an issue you need to repent from. It is one you need to submit to the Father for sure.
Yes.
But bitterness and rebellion absolutely can be repented upon. I mean, that's one of the messages of Ezekiel. If this rebellious nation stops and submits and repents, they will be forgiven. So at any point, depending on where you are down this journey, now there's another element to this, which is actually a fourth one I added on, which is evil. What does actual human evil look like? And that's another term that has lost all meaning too.
Yes.
We tend to think evil means illegal.
Right.
It absolutely does. Most evil people don't do illegal things because they don't want to appear evil. It's a tricky game, and it's all about deception. It's deception and oppression.
And that leads perfectly into where I want to go next. Just real quick before we go there, like you said, the rejection doesn't necessarily need repentance because rejection is not always a bad thing. The Father can I almost guarantee that if there is rejection in your life, then He is guiding it, and He will use it for the good if you will allow Him. We have that place to choose to be bitter about it, go that direction, or we can use it for His glory to, do exactly what He's intending us to do. And I'm looking at the clock here. We're about to run out of time on this side of it. So we'll come back and we'll go ahead.
I'll say this real quick before the music plays. I actually was in a really bad place when in my early 20s with rejection and rebellion and all these type of things. And I had a girlfriend who was a very devout Christian. And one day I think the Father got a hold of her and she rejected me and broke up with me. This is the woman I was certain I was going to marry. We'll come back for that, I guess.
Yeah. Shalom, everyone. Welcome back to Unashamed. And considering what we're talking about, I just want to throw in the word shalom. It does not simply mean peace, as our American English language has put it. If you look into the Paleo-Hebrew of the letters of shalom, it literally is a picture of the meaning of may everything in your life that is causing chaos be destroyed. So with that, shalom, everyone. And we are back. And Cole, you were in the middle of telling a story.
Yeah, I was telling a story about how rejection actually can work for you if you submit it to the Father. And it was actually, I was about 19 or 20 years old and I had found the girl I was going to marry for sure. And, but I was not in a good place spirit. I was still coming out of the occult, still in a very rebellious phase. Well, this was your good Christian girl who, gorgeous girl who just, was wonderful. And really what it was is I did not know how to properly treat a handmaiden of Yah like she was. And she rejected me by breaking up with me. It kind of shattered all the dreams I had about us, and it really destroyed me. But what it was, I think, it was supposed to. And I believe it was actually the Father, looking back now, I would have never admitted this the day after, but I believe it was the Father actually protecting her and keeping me from doing something extremely sinful, And so rejection is actually something that you can learn to become grateful for.
Yes.
It is something that can wake you up. It is something that the Father might take from you, something along those lines. So
yeah, because if we have the thing that can be called, not all the time, but it can be called the curse of success, and everything's just going wonderful, acceptance everywhere, then there's no reason to stop and second guess or think about anything. So rejection will, like you said, it'll wake you up.
Yes, comfort is the enemy of faith. So when you get comfortable, you no longer quote unquote need God in your own mind.
Right.
So
So the next place we're going to go here, now that we've established that baseline, is there's something really good going on, and that is there's a lot of youth out there that I see that truly are desiring to get away from the arguments of our quote-unquote forefathers. And, it's a wonderful thing, but I see a part of it that is leading into compromise and is leading into a lack of discernment. And, I see these things with the statements like, the Father knows their heart, just let them do what they, want to do and love them and be at peace with them. But, that there are things to stand up for. There are things to stay away from. And, so I'd like to get into some of those things, some of the traps that the enemy sets for us that look harmless maybe on the outside, but are, waiting to do damage to us. So what do you have to say about that?
As far as the snares go, every snare that I have seen that the adversary puts in front of us usually has its root in some type of emotion. We were talking before we went on the air that I actually am coming to realize that many times emotions are the doorways that allow either people in, that's the relationships, that type of thing, where you can let the wrong thing in through emotions. And rejection is a very emotional thing. It's a very, shocking thing that happens to you. You're not really sure how to feel. Most of us, when we don't know how to feel, we resort to anger because we don't know. It's kind of like a defense mechanism,
Right.
It's, well, the thing is that what led me into the occult when I was, 18 to 19 years old, was a feeling of rejection, but then it was this sense that I could control something. It was, I can become, if I'm not respected, at least maybe I can be feared. And when you go down that road, you end up being neither, by the way. That's a lot of the goth kids out there. It is if I can't be respected, if I'm so counterculture, If society is rejecting me, then I'm going to go ahead and reject them back with what they consider normal, you know? And that was one area I went down. And most people tend to look at the black clothes. They look at the black trench coat or whatever the kid's wearing. They don't ever ask. They look at the what. What is this kid doing? Well, if we can get the what's in their minds, if we can get the what stopped, then he'll be okay. Very rarely do people ask the right question, which is why is this kid doing this? And almost every time it is a bitterness issue.
Right.
And so when people go after kids who are doing something that they view as wrong, everybody goes after the behavior, but don't ask the question, why are you doing these things?
Right.
And the thing about it is, what is not relational? What is what you see? What is what you notice? What you can control? Why opens up conversation in relationship. And that's really what a lot of rejected young kids or rejected teenagers or youth are looking for, is that relationship. They want to listen and be heard. So we were talking about some of the things. I don't know, Daniel, you do want to go into some of the things that you see as snares for the youth? You're a little more in touch with that than I am, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I know these things by not by doing.
Right.
So we have things like card games, like Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons, to name a couple, and you have things like Harry Potter and horror movies, which I have heard people adamantly defend. And to me, in my opinion, those ones that I named specifically, we'll stick on those for now,
Sure.
before we branch out. To me, those are things to stay away from. Those have, in my mind, witchery kind of bad juju stuff written all over them. So
Sure.
my question is, where do we find the line in that between, reaching out and not compromising on being on that holiness, on being set apart still?
One of the things that the acceptance is kind of the remedy for, and meaning that you accept somebody for who they are at the time, is usually the cure for rebellion in that person's life.
Right.
And so when you see, inherently, I always look at things like the playing card games like Magic the Gathering or any of those, or Harry Potter. I would ask people, what about those appeals to you? And they will usually go, well, it's fun. Why is it fun? Well, it's fun to watch, and here comes what they want in their own life. It's fun to watch a young man be able to control other people or control his environment. And I go, so is that something that you desire, which is to be able to control your environment? And they tend to go, well, yeah, I guess so. Or they'll go no, and then it'll go somewhere else. But let's just follow, like, if they say yes. So why do you feel the need to, see, it's always why. Why do you feel the need to control your environment? Well, it's just so chaotic. There's the answer.
Yeah.
That's it right there. It's a response, not necessarily a source of rebellion. I agree wholeheartedly with that these things are snares, but nobody's asking the right questions. They're all asking what are the snares, not why are people walking into them. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's, if we have been guaranteed and promised victory over the enemy, then why is he winning?
Right.
Which is one of the biggest questions I ask in deliverance all the time is, where is the thing that's giving victory to the enemy over you? Because you say you're a believer, you say you believe in Yeshua, you have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Most of the time they don't, because they're in rebellion of some type. So what causes this is why are youth drawn to these type of things? And it's very complex and very simple at the same time. It's complex in that every youth has a different reason for wanting to be drawn to that. but
Yeah.
it's usually always the same in that they want something and they crave something that they're not getting
Yeah.
at home.
And I understand. The people. I understand where a person is coming from when they say that they have different interpretations of things. But I'd like to put a statement out there for that, and that is, Yeshua lives inside of us. If you have accepted him, then he lives inside of you. He is with you. And if you truly believe that, then would you make him look at the things you're looking at? Would you make him do the things you're doing? Would you take him to the movie that you're going to see? And,
Right.
I think that's a serious question that we should be asking, not just in these things, but really in all areas of our life. Would we take him to the places that we're going? And, because I know there are still people that will defend that, and that's your opinion, but I would challenge anyone to please look at these things, because though it is not ultimately the object, it is the heart of the person. They can be a very useful tool for the enemy to lead you into a dark place.
Yeah, it's the question of the idol. If there's an idol, the pagans sacrifice not to idols but to demons. So the true idolatry is worshiping demons through an object. It's so really the issue is not the object. Now I've got to be careful how I say this, because people have spent years railing against Christmas trees. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is this. What I'm saying is this, is that the worship is what brings the demonic activity. You could worship a demon with anything, any object, any emotion. You can submit to the adversary. It's really something in us, not something in the world. Really the reason I think we don't like the world so much in the Hebrew roots is it reminds us where we came from. There's still a lot of guilt there on our part that we need to work through. That's that hostility that I'm hearing toward, really our Christian brothers remind us what we came out of, and they remind us of the guilt we felt when we came to the knowledge that the things they're doing are not always right. So it's a response of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that case, you may be a person that has been drawn out of, these kind of things, and then there's the danger of, there's you come to someone else and you can completely condemn them, and do it in a very non-fruitful way that leads them darker into that path, because if a person is deep into something dark, and then someone comes along and tries to force a light down their throat, that spirit of rebellion is just going to cause them to go further in. It's not going to make them want to follow the light. It's going to make them want to get away from the light.
Yeah, and it's delivering Yahweh's message with the enemy's tactic, through an oppressive means. And really what it is I'm doing something good, right? I'm doing something good by doing this. And it's almost a manic attempt to justify. It's almost like we still have that dualistic meaning, yin and yang type thing. Well, if I do something good, that balances out the bad. No, it doesn't work that way in the Bible. You're either righteous or you're not. You're either on or you're off. You're righteous or you're not. And you brought up horror movies. Horror movies are an exploitation of the amygdala in your brain. It's, they have found that somebody who's watching a scene on TV that's scary and somebody who's in a scary situation both react the same way. Your brain on that level can't tell the difference.
Wow.
But eventually what happens is that you become numb to it. So how do you then, when real danger approaches, are you now so jaded and turned off and numb to it that you can't recognize it now when it actually approaches? Everybody on 9/11 looked up at those towers being hit and said, it's just like a movie. They were so detached from reality that they couldn't identify, gee whiz, this is really happening. So So let's just say, Yahweh forbid that you've been watching, The Exorcism of Emily Rose or something along those lines, something very demonic in nature, and then a real demon shows up.
Oof.
Well, you're expecting crawling across the ceiling and speaking in 4,000 tongues and speaking backwards, and actually demons are way more subtle than that. So now you don't perceive that demon as a threat, and you don't do anything about it.
Wow.
But I'm going to tell you, you let the adversary in that way.
Yeah.
It is that the doorway is us, not the things we're looking at. The doorway is us every time.
And that kind of, in that of what you just said, kind of shatters the argument I've heard of, well, it's good to know. It is good to know about, how to face these things in reality. But if you're basing your quote unquote knowing upon, a movie, then, your example is absolutely perfect for that. And another thing I would say to that is, the tree was of the knowledge of good and evil, and it wasn't supposed to be eaten of.
Right. Well, I mean, here's the thing. If I hadn't read what I've read and been through what I've been through, I wouldn't have the gifts I have. That being said, I walked through a very fiery road of rebellion that I would not want anybody else to walk down to get to this. Really, what movies do, let's just go horror movies for a second. Movies about serial killers scare me infinitely more than movies about demonic activity, because human beings are wild cards. They are not under the authority of the Messiah or Yahweh. They're not. So when I'm watching a horror movie now, I laugh because what they're doing is they're trying to simulate visually, because that's the only medium they have, visually when you're in the presence of a demon, the emotional and the spiritual impact that demon has on you. So if you're so emotionally numb and so spiritually numb by watching these things, it actually will lower your discernment level, and you won't be able to identify the subtlety of the adversary. I think I already said that, but I guess it needed to be said again. Is that, an allowance of witchcraft in our lives. We can't understand what witchcraft actually is, which is, the same word. The word sorcery in Hebrew is the same root word as the serpent in the garden, nachash. It is the same thing. So it is a desire to control, or desire to oppress, or the desire to dominate. That's essentially what witchcraft is and sorcery is. So if you're watching Harry Potter, you're watching a kid through what looks like fun attempt to control and dominate his environment. Now, we obviously know that is sinful, because Yahweh's the one who should be dominating and controlling our environment.
Yes. I just want to throw in here, to anybody listening, I'm not trying to condemn the people to do these things. I am simply asking them really to take a second look and to consider, what is being said of how is the enemy trying to numb us? What is he trying to numb us to? And, with that, where do we draw the line? We have, the more obvious things, but then we have the more, the gray areas, the movies, like Thor, a little, like I said, less seemingly harmless at the beginning. So, where's the line? How do we discern between those kind of things?
That's a tough one. And the reason it's tough is because my line is not necessarily where somebody else's line is.
Right.
My family and I do partake of, and I'm going to probably lose a lot of it, we do enjoy watching Disney movies. The problem, the question I ask is, what's being taught? And people go, well, they're portraying evil. Every story in literature, in the whole of human literature, including the Bible, by the way, has an element of evil trying to overcome good. Every single one.
Yeah.
So the question is if you go back and read the original Grimm's fairy tales, they're horrifying, but they're part of literature. They're part of human history. And the thing is that who's doing, like they say, well, they have magic in them. Well, who's using the magic? The movie Brave. I really enjoy that one because the young lady turns to a witch and nothing goes right. She follows familiar spirits through the woods that lead her to a witch. Was that something that I would tell my child is a bad idea? And the witch gives her a spell. The spell does something horrifying. She immediately regrets it. She immediately learns a lesson. She gains wisdom. And I tell my daughters, and I go, look, see what happens when you go to witches. And it's like, well, what about, well, you have to deal with witches. Witches are written about in Scripture. You have to. You have to pray against them because they're actively working against you. So the line for me is who's using what to do what. That's kind of where I am. And number one, I mean, it's kind of a cop-out. You brought up Thor. Thor in the movie is not a god necessarily. He's an alien. Well, okay, I don't know if that's any better, but at the same time, it's one of those things where I'm sitting there kind of going, this is not me worshiping by looking at it. I can walk, if I look at an idol, am I worshiping it? No.
Yeah, but and I mean, I can hear the people in my head. I'm sure you can too, saying, well, you guys are contradicting yourselves. No, we're really not. Please understand and hear what we're saying. There are obvious things, and then there are not so obvious things. Please just don't twist our words.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that people want to be very black and white on this, and you can't be. We were talking about there are statues. Are all statues evil? Well, of course not, because there were statues in the temple. The two cherubim sitting next to the ark. In the holiest place on the planet, there are statues. Statues are not inherently bad. The problem is, what is that statue being used for? Is that statue now being received as a god? Is it symbolizing a god? That kind of thing. So it's a very gray area, and it's not as easy as you think. I think this is where discernment is needed.
Yeah.
And people, I believe, who lack discernment or choose not to use it, rather, because they don't really have an answer for their actions in some cases, they tend to throw everything out that even looks like it. The problem is you're not discerning, analyzing, you are not working out things for yourself. It's the inherent danger is this. It is the inherent problem is the heart issue in relation to the world. We live in a very evil, fallen world. When Israel was judged, it was sent to the most evil and pagan empire on the planet, which is Babylon. Babylon is still the standard by which we judge everything. Does that mean that everybody who's living in Babylon, who is walking past idols every day, who is encountering these things, does that mean they're immediately bowing their knee to it? Of course not. I would hope not. It is acknowledging it, understanding it's there, and then not giving it your worship.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the things like Harry Potter and you desire what he desires, that's the trap. That's the trap. I don't want Mjolnir the hammer in my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't, to be like Thor. I don't look at him and go, I want to be that guy. It is a very disconnected feeling toward that. But the heart is always the issue. Always.
Yeah. And, with that, I think that's a great place to end. A closing statement, just be discerning. There's going to be a lot of things that come our way, and it's going to continue to increase, and it will be harder to discern a lot of the time. So just, grow close to the Father, and that discernment will come. So, Cole, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. And everyone else, we will see you next week.